Thank you so much, Kate, and thanks to Oxford for hosting.
Pleasure.
I'm doing just the tiniest introduction, and then I'm going to completely shift roles and just to be a runner. So if you need any hands-on things, just ask me. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to introduce Daisy. So some of you know me, but not everyone. And I'm hoping Oxford's going to know me a little bit better, because from the autumn, I'm going to be starting as a scholar at the Life Writing Centre here, in the Jewish Women's Voices programme. But my day job, my real job, is that I'm the director of Jewish Renaissance, which is the UK's Jewish Arts and Culture Quarterly. So when Peyton, Larry and Alice were talking to me about writing Jewish women's lives and having something kind of unusual and interesting, the first person I thought of was Daisy. So I wanted to have the honour of introducing her, because Daisy is someone I've known for a long time. She looks young, but she's slightly older than she looks, and she's had quite a storied career. So I first met Daisy when she was studying classical history at university. But she then went on to become deputy director of an organisation called Sephardi Voices. So Sephardi Jews are those from the non-Ashkenazi, non-European heritage. In some cases, you expand to Mizrahi Eastern as well, but in many cases, it's Spanish and Portuguese Jews. And they were running, and Daisy in particular was running, an oral history programme where she was interviewing people, often second or third generation, or immigrants themselves, and documenting their lives. And this was a massive project, and actually often the people whose stories that she uncovered became part of the Sephardi Renaissance section of our magazine. So Daisy did this for many years, and it was hugely impressive. And then she decided to take a turn, which was to document her own family history. So I'm not going to tell you about the Sudan background. I'm going to let Daisy tell you about her family in Sudan herself. But in the last couple of years, she's been doing this project called Tales of Jewish Sudan. And I was lucky enough to go to a couple of lectures / cooking workshops that she's done for it, because a lot of what you've talked about has been stories of the community through food. And that seemed like such an interesting and creative way to address our culture and heritage. And I just noticed that in the last few weeks, Samantha Ellis, I don't know if anyone knows her, but she's an Iraqi Jewish writer. She's just published a biography, a memoir / cookbook. And the title is something like Chopping Onions, but the subtitle is on losing and preserving culture. And it felt to me that that's exactly what Daisy is doing with her work on Sudan and her work on food. It's about food, but it's about culture. It's about what we've lost, but also what we can keep and take forward. So I'm hoping you're going to enjoy it as much as I've enjoyed learning from and working with her. And on that note, Daisy, over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a very elaborate introduction. I am going to just sit down for most of this because I'm quite pregnant and my back hurts. So sorry. But yes, as Aviva said, my name is Daisy. I started Tales of Jewish Sudan. I actually started it in 2015, did it for a year or so, then started working at Sephardi Voices, and that kind of took over. And then in the last year, I've kind of gone back to it. The slide 7, yeah. So I was kind of inspired by my grandparents. I grew up with these stories kind of as bedtime stories. So instead of like normal bedtime stories, my granddad would just tell me about that. And that was very informative, but also kind of as a young child, you don't really know what's fiction and what's fact. And these kind of stories that seem so far away in this kind of exotic kind of hole in the desert and this and that. And I was like, this is just not real. And it was only as I kind of grew up and started asking more and more questions that I kind of started sorting out. He used to put in folk tales as well, which didn't help the matter a lot. So I kind of started questioning more and learning more and kind of looking at it in a more historical way, especially in history at university. So I started to kind of be more interested in that way. And there's not really anything written about the Jews of Sudan, or at least there wasn't when I started, except for one book written by the Rabbi's son in the 90s. So that was kind of where I was coming from. Just a very quick, brief history. That's where Sudan is. The Jews were living in Khartoum, which is the capital, Omdurman, which is also on the Nile, but just very close to Khartoum, and then Wad Medani, which is another smaller town slightly downriver. And that's kind of where the main center of the Jewish community was. Just a little brief bit about the community in general before I start talking about women, so you've got some context. It was a very small community, about 250 families, so very small.
Was that the whole of Sudan?
In the whole of Sudan, yes. In the whole of, yeah, and obviously North and South at the time were one country. So yeah, in the whole of Sudan, it was a very small community. One synagogue. The community was kind of arrived. There were Jews before 1898 when the British colonized Sudan, but not in an organized community. It was kind of set up as an organized community with community structures when more and more Jews started to arrive after the British with the railway from Egypt. So that was kind of the route into Sudan. And it wasn't just Jewish community that came at that time. There were other kind of, as they were called, foreign communities, so Syrian, Armenian, Lebanese, all sorts, Greeks, very big Greek community as well. So all those kind of communities were centered around Khartoum and Omdurman. They were an Arabic-speaking community, completely Arabic-speaking. Initially, the oldest generations would be speaking Arabic from whichever country they came from, because they did mostly come from the Middle East. There was one or two Ashkenazi, like Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi Eastern European Jews. But everyone's like, it's okay, they were like us, they ate our food. So, so yeah, so there were a couple, but mostly they were from the Arab world. And they came in, like I say, through Egypt. So they would go to Egypt initially and then come down into Sudan. And mostly they were coming for economic reasons. So it wasn't a particularly religious community. It was a very kind of entrepreneurial, business-minded community. They were going there because it was a new colony and there were business opportunities and they were doing terribly back home. So they were sent to Sudan, basically, by their other communities. Go and try your luck there. So that's kind of where the rough kind of background. I promise you this is the only slide full of men, but it's kind of hard to do an history slide without a slide full of men, unfortunately. So Sudan was originally under Ottoman rule in 1820. I'm going to speed through this and I'm going to be very, very brief. So bear with me. It was under Ottoman rule. There was a revolt and the self-styled Mahdi, Mohammed Ahmed, took over and kind of gained independence, created an independent rule. That lasted for 15 years. The Mahdi is the one who conquered or took over Khartoum with Gordon. Gordon was actually employed by the Ottomans to be there, not by the British. But we're skipping through that very quickly, unfortunately. So yeah, he kind of independent rule. The British took over from him, so he had a period of rule. Under the Mahdi, he actually died almost within months of taking control. And it was his second in command who ran Sudan for 15 years. But the period is called the Mahdiya. And in that period, there were very Islamic laws passed, mostly aimed at the Christian missionaries, because there were a lot of Christian missionaries in Sudan at the time, that stated that anyone that wasn't Muslim had to convert to Islam. And the few Jews that were there were kind of caught up in these laws. So they converted to Islam. And then when the British came and these laws were repealed, some of them went back to Judaism, some of them stayed Muslim. So there are still families now in Khartoum that are descended from the Jewish, with surnames like Israel, living like fully Muslim lives in Khartoum. And they've got issues now, unfortunately. So once the community was established, that it was those kind of families that decided to kind of build a community structure. They sent for a rabbi, they were sent to, which was then British Mandate to Palestine, and they got this Moroccan rabbi, Rabbi Shlomo Malka, and he arrived in 1906 and then served the community until he died in 1949. It was, like I say, there was a synagogue in Khartoum that was built in the 1920s. There was a community club that was built in the 1940s. So there was kind of community structure. The Rabbi Malka was the mohel, who did all the brits, circumcisions. He was the shochet, he did all the kosher slaughtering. He was the rabbi, he did everything. And yeah, the community was kind of a small but kind of active community. Israel gaining independence in 1948 didn't really make that much of a difference to the community in Sudan. It didn't really impact them in the way that it did other Middle Eastern countries. A few of the very poorest Jews decided to go to Israel at that point, just to kind of try their luck there. But it didn't really impact the community too much. So Sudan gained independence in 1956, January 1956. And later in the same year, October 56, was the Suez Crisis. And that's kind of when things started to become slightly uncomfortable for the Jews, mostly kind of influenced by Nasserism in Egypt. So the same kind of propaganda from Egypt that was coming through to Sudan, because Sudan and Egypt are very, very closely linked. Throughout history. So 1956, a few Jews left. Again, it was mostly like poorer Jews or employed Jews who didn't have property and didn't really have much of a stake. They started to leave in 1956. At the same time, in 1958, 2 years later, there was a coup. So initially Sudan had a civilian government, then there was a military coup and they had a military government. I won't get into that, but at that time, kind of between 58 and 64, things politically in Sudan were kind of a bit up and down. There was stability, but there was kind of rumblings. In 1964, there was a revolution, a student-led revolution, and a civilian government was reinstated, but there was a lot of rioting on the streets and that's kind of a lot of when the North-South Sudanese kind of discrimination began to take hold in a more violent way. So that kind of made the Jews a bit nervous, the Jewish community a bit nervous when there's rioting on the street and things become a little bit more political and Nasserism is taking over and the new civilian government is very closely aligned to Nasserism. So in 64, between 56 and 64, there's kind of been a trickle of Jews leaving, but by 64 is when I would say the last wave, people start selling their property and people start to actually leave. But again, there was no specific laws against Jews. There was no specific discrimination. There were cases, things in the newspapers and radios, but nothing kind of dictated by the government. 1967 and the Six-Day War, again, Nasserism, things really kick off it. So all the young Jewish men who couldn't afford to not be were arrested and placed in jail during the Six-Day War in Sudan. And that was kind of the last, I would say, nail in the coffin for the last Jews that were left. And some didn't leave. Most of them at that point just left. They'd left all their property, they left food in the fridge, and they just pretended they were going on holiday and never came back. There were a very few number of Jews, and when I say few, I mean like less than 10, 12 Jews who stayed after 67. Most of them were in Wad Medani because they were kind of far away from the capital and all the political kind of upheaval. No one really cared. There was such a small community by then that no one really cared they were there. In the 70s, Sudan goes through a period of communism, and that's when most of the vast foreign communities leave, when things start to get nationalized, businesses start to get nationalized. So that's kind of when they left. In 1986, the synagogue was sold. It became a bank, and then the bank has been demolished subsequently, so there's nothing there. The only thing that's there is a cemetery in Khartoum, but I think since the Civil War, I don't think there's anything left of that. There's no way of checking, but yeah, so there were 2 Jews left in Sudan, and they left in 2023 when the Civil War began. Completely by luck. They went on holiday 2 days before, and now their house is rubble. So that's the speediest history. I'm sorry I left loads of gaps, but I hope it wasn't. Yeah, let's get into it. Right, the fun stuff. So, like I said, it wasn't a particularly religious community in Sudan. It was kind of traditional, but not religious. And actually, the community had quite positive, like, female, women attitudes towards women for the time. Obviously that changes because the community begins in 1906 and ends in 1960, and that's a massive period of change anyway. But the girls were all educated. They went to private schools like the boys. They went to girls' schools. So there was the Catholic Sisters School, and there was Unity High School, which was a Jesuit English school. And those were the 2 main schools that girls went to. And generally as children, girls were free to roam with the boys, play with the boys. It was only when like puberty hit that the segregation kind of started a little bit. So yeah, I mean, you get stories. There's one lady who said, when her daughter turned 12, she took her aside and she said to her, "Look now at Khartoum, because this is the last time you're going to see this city. I'm sending you to boarding school and you're never coming back," because she was afraid of the way that she was looked at as a woman, as a girl, and she wanted her to be in Europe. But then there are, also stories about, women that have said to me, it was sad to leave Sudan, but actually once we got to Israel, it was so free. I could like go out by myself, and I could go to dances, and I could do all these things, and I wasn't allowed to do any of that in Khartoum. So yeah, I mean, you do have stories. There was one girl who's temporarily expelled from school because they thought she was dating an Italian. And it was only when the Italian came and said that he wasn't dating her that she was allowed back in school. So yeah, there are these kind of stories, but generally the girls were allowed, they went out with friends, they could live a life. And that's especially true once they kind of grew up a little bit. I think the teen years are probably the most repressive for girls in Sudan. So in terms of work, most women would work after school and before getting married, as secretaries or typists, teachers. But there was kind of a financial divide even back there. So there's the same woman who sent her daughter to Europe. Her husband was one of the richest men in Sudan. They were 5 brothers, and they owned, I mean, they had factories. They were like definitely amongst the richest people in Sudan at the time. And one of the things they had was a shop selling DMC tapestry materials. And they found out that one of the staff had been stealing from the till. And that meant that they had a staff shortage. So she went to work in the shop, took control and went to work in the shop. And this was like a big scandal amongst her in crowd, because she was seen as like, you know, too wealthy to be working in a shop. It was kind of too much for them. And she, because I think she's quite amazing, she's 98 and she's still like fully with it now. But she basically just told them all to do one. Because, you know, why should I be sitting on my bum all day doing nothing when I can be working in a shop? But I think she managed to get away with that because she had that social status and that financial kind of, yeah, it was a very financially driven hierarchy within the community. So I think she managed to get away with it because of that. There was definitely kind of an idea that once you got married, you didn't need to work and you shouldn't be working. On the flip side, the poorer members of the community, so Esther Laney, she actually was not poorer in the end because she ran a pawn shop and gambling den. So supported vast amounts of her family doing that. So that was kind of a more common but underground way of making money for people, for the poorer members of the community, those whose husbands were maybe not doing so well. It was very common to have, you know, gambling dens upstairs in your house somewhere, and the women would be running that completely. And she was actually got so successful at it that apparently all the government officials were using her as a pawn, because that's kind of what she did. And when she left Sudan, you couldn't take money out, so she sewed all her money into her clothes and kind of bamboozled all the workers at the airport to let her go through, because she was this character. So yeah, that was like the 2 flip sides of respectable work and maybe not so respectable work, but women were doing it all. In terms of marriage, first of all, there was no unchaperoned dating at all. So you would always take a younger sibling, usually a younger brother, with you on all of your dates until you got married, and try to kind of ditch them somewhere so that you could get on with your date. But yeah, so that's kind of how dating happens. In the earlier years, marriage was organized or arranged by parents. As the years went by, things became a bit more relaxed and love matches became more common. But most women got married between 18 and 22. It wasn't a particularly you know, young marriage. Although, having said that, there are some outliers, especially in the early years. If you look at some of the records of the earliest marriages, actually even I hate to say it, but my great grandmother, like she got married when she was 12. So there were very young marriages. And even as you got older, there were some that got married. There's one woman I spoke to, she got married at 14, completely didn't want to get married. Her father kind of decided that she was going to get married and that was the end of it. But that was rarer. It was much more common. Yeah, like I say, 18 to 20, even 16. But 16 was mostly the girl wanting to get married, like she'd fallen in love and she wanted to get married. And then their parents would be like, yeah, okay, rather than kind of being forced. So while there are these stories, actually it's quite, it's not as bad. The men that they were marrying were older. So the men were between kind of 22, 25, 30. So there was definitely a gap, as we would say now. But for them, that was like kind of normal. And that actually became a bit of a problem as the community went on, as people started to leave, because there were no women or no girls left unmarried for the men who were still there. So if you imagine they're all kind of 18, the 18-year-old girls are still married by the time are already married. By the time the men get to 25 and are looking to marry, there's no girls left. And that's why a lot of them actually left Sudan in the later years of the community. So the other thing is that the ketubot, the marriage certificates, if you look at them, they kind of show quite a breadth of provision for the women. There's like one woman that had in her marriage contract that she had to take her grand piano with her to her married house. And there's quite a lot of specific things like that, and very specific, provisions for the women financially, beyond standard contracts. And the other thing is that divorce rate was 14%, which is actually quite high. Divorce was done like through Egypt, but there are definitely women-led divorces. They're saying that, like, my husband is abusive, and they would leave them, and that was kind of okay. It wasn't so shocking as you might imagine. So that did happen, especially again, like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. So I think all in all, for that period in that part of the world, it was not as bad as it could have been. Motherhood, I kind of got more interested in this as I got pregnant. I kind of didn't pay that much attention to it initially. So initially there were home births with a midwife. The prime midwife was a Greek woman, Mrs. Setinas, who everyone remembers and talks about. So she was like the midwife that you would go to. And then again, as things got, as time went on, people started going to the Catholic hospitals to give birth. But what they used to do after birth was this period of confinement. So for 40 days, a woman would basically stay in her bed or her bedroom as time went on. The whole community would be around, look after her, cook, clean, look after any other kids, and basically just feed her as much as they could so that she could breastfeed. And that was it. That was her job for 40 days. And yeah, just kind of interestingly that kind of seemed so mad to me when I started doing this. And now it's kind of coming back into fashion a little bit, this idea of breastfeeding after birth and, staying in bed, and it's kind of taking off a little bit in online and stuff. So it's quite interesting how things kind of come around in that way. The other thing is that women had nannies. Well, the Jewish women all had nannies, Sudanese women mostly, and they would bring up the children as well. And people talk about their nannies, that they call them haboba, which is like an honorific old lady term. And yeah, they had very strong connections with them, and kind of kept in touch with them as they got older, and even after they left Sudan, a lot of them. Yeah. So I don't think you can separate food, women, and community at all when you're talking about the community of Sudan, because they're all completely intertwined. The food they made took a long time. You'd have to go to the market, you'd have to prepare your meat, you'd have to kosher your meat, you'd have to mince your meat, you'd have to mince your grains, you'd have to roll everything by hand, you'd have to chop everything by hand. Yes, they had cooks to help. A lot of them had cooks to help, but it took a long, long time. And when you're not working, that's what you're doing. You wake up, you're preparing food. Women wouldn't go to the market, men would only go to the market. The men would come back home for lunch. Lunch was the main meal. They'd come home from work for lunch, have a sleep because it was so hot, obviously, and then go back to work in the evening and then go out to the club and stuff. But cooking was a very communal activity. People would cook together, again, because it took so long. You would sit and actually when we cook a lot of the traditional food now, we would do it together. Like we cook and, on festivals we make stuffed vine leaves, and it takes a long time to roll like enough stuffed vine leaves for like 15 people, 20 people. So you have to do it with people, and you chat and you talk, and that's kind of how you would cook. And there's also there's a pride in cooking. So each woman had her recipes that were her things that she did. And she did the best, and it was kind of accepted. So it was like, this woman does the best, like kibba, like stuffed meat, and this woman does the best this, and this woman, and that was kind of accepted. And there's a jealousy in recipes as well. So collecting recipes has actually been quite difficult, because people will often purposefully give you a wrong recipe, so that you can't make it as good as them, which is really frustrating. Like you go home and have to like work out what they've like messed up for you. If there even is a recipe, you know, that you have to kind of learn the code like a little bit or a handful, and or a, you know, so that's kind of the way that they cooked. But there's also like this pride. So I was talking to these women are in their 80s now, and they're talking about their aunt in Sudan, and he was, you know, the way they say it, they're like, oh, she didn't cook properly, she used a crock pot. You're like, you were like 14, what do you care that she used a crock? But you know, there's a definite like snobbery around it. You know, she didn't cook for her family, she used a crock pot, she was too busy, you know, going out with her friends or whatever. I don't know what she was doing. All the best to her. But yeah, so it was a kind of a pride in it. And the other thing is that it, especially outside of Khartoum, in Wad Medani especially, and amongst, again, there's a snobbery, but amongst the poorer members of the community, cooking and food was the way that women had these interfaith relationships, whereas men's interfaith relationships were mostly kind of based on business and clients and entertaining. The women were cooking together and helping each other. Like they would, you know, especially in Wad Medani, the Muslim women would come and help on Passover to prepare all the matzah, because that all had to be done by hand. And then the Jewish woman would cook on Ramadan, so that the women would have like food ready to eat at the end of fast. So there was a lot of like, this is kind of how they formed their friendships, and how friendships kind of manifested themselves. But even amongst the kind of Khartoum jet set, although they were jetting a bit, but they're cooking again. Like if there weren't caterers, so if you had a bar mitzvah or a wedding, you would cater that yourself, and you can't cater for the whole community yourself. The whole community would kind of get involved. So there's like one bar mitzvah that they had, the big story was that there was a new machine that could cut potatoes really finely, and they made chips, and that was like the talk of on that day, because they could have chips at this bar mitzvah. So there was definitely like this kind of communal aspect to it, and the formation of a lot of female friendships, I would say, through cooking and while cooking as well. So what I'm going to do is start cooking. When I initially booked this, we were like talking about Shavuot, which is coming up soon, festival, and it's customary in Ashkenazi communities to eat dairy. Shavuot, I'm going back, yeah, to eat dairy. And I asked around at the time, I kind of emailed a few of the aunties, and I was like, what did you do on Shavuot? Because no one really mentioned it in any of my interviews, and I did like, you know, 80 plus interviews, and they're like, no, we didn't really do Shavuot, that wasn't really a thing. And I was like, did you eat anything out? No, not really. Like I say, it wasn't a very religious community. It didn't really feature on the calendar. So I was thinking, right, what would you, if I was now doing Shavuot in Sudan, eating dairy as an Ashkenazi Jew, I did a bit of mental gymnastics, and I came up with knafa, which is a cheese based pastry and cheese. So I was like, okay, well, we'll do that. I've bought some of that, and that's very quick to make. And there's also basbousa, which is another kind of sweet cake with yogurt in it. So what I'm gonna do is move over. I've cooked them at home because we don't have an oven. But what I'm gonna do is show you how to make them, and then 2 people can take them home. Basically, the uncooked versions, you can decide who wants it and just take it. So that's what we're gonna do. Do you have any questions about this? If not, at the end, we can like eat and chat and you can ask questions as well. But yeah.
I was working in Sudan from 79 onwards, so that was interesting to me. But sitting out in the darkness of the night, we would all sit on the ground, round in the circle, each with our hands, and just grab and so on and so forth. So I was wondering what was the way that the Jewish thing, you know, how it was organized, how the meals were organized. Did they have tables? Did they go on the ground? What did they do?
They ate in a Western style at
Okay.
tables. The children would sometimes eat, sounds awful, but with the servants who would eat in like a more traditional style. And they would eat in a traditional style if they were kind of with friends.
They do eat with
Knives and forks, yeah. Knives and forks at a table, and there was a bit of snobbery. I can't lie, like there was a bit of snobbery about, you know, that was not how we ate. We were a bit more European, although they weren't European at all. But, you know.
So a few families, were there any intermarriages?
Yes, completely. Oh yeah. Cousins, second cousins. Yeah, and they actually knew this, and they had this concept of bringing in new blood. So they would be like, okay, we've like too many people have now married each other, we'll send to Egypt, because it was very closely linked to Egypt as well. So a lot of people would get married to someone from Egypt, but there was definitely this idea of like, oh, you know, like you can't marry, like we need some new. They literally called it new blood, and they would like either send someone to Egypt or send someone back. But yes, like cousin marriages was like nothing.
Because in India, that brought out a lot of recessive illnesses in the Jewish community in Kerala.
Yeah.
Intermarriage made very, very difficult.
Yeah. No, I think because
Tay-Sachs disease, I don't know whether you remember.
Yeah. No, I think because they used Egypt, and Egypt is a massive community. So because the communities were so interlinked in that way, that actually, I mean, I'm not going to say there were no genetic diseases, but it's not as rife as you might think.
And what about interfaith marriages? Were there any?
There were, yes, there were. There were, yeah, there definitely were. There was also quite a lot of conversion. When I say quite a lot, both ways. Quite a lot, but that's like, you know, relatively speaking, probably maybe 5 to 10, but in context, that's quite a lot. And there were, so the Jews, I mentioned them at the very beginning, the ones that were converted to Islam. So part of that law was also that you had to take a Sudanese Muslim wife. So some of them, they had like the second wife was a Sudanese Muslim wife, and they kept the Jewish wife, the original wife. And then when the laws repealed, they kind of converted back, and they converted the Sudanese Muslim wives as well. So you did have kind of, yeah, that as well, that aspect to it as well. And they were obviously more connected to the like wider Sudanese population, because that's where they came from. Yeah.
Sorry, I was late, so I didn't hear the beginning. So, but can you tell me where did the community come from originally?
Mostly from around the Middle East. So, everyone, like the whole Middle East, and North Africa. But yeah, that's generally where it came from.
Casey, thank you so much.
So, just this man was first. Sorry.
You said something in we today. Is there a Sudanese Jewish diaspora still around?
Yes. So when the community left, those who could afford to generally went to America or the UK. Then those who couldn't afford to went to Israel. And those who left very late and left as refugees went to Switzerland. So there's communities in America, mostly New Jersey, and now some of them have retired to Florida, so they're there. And then UK, London, and Geneva and Israel.
And you're part of that.
I'm a part of that. So all my grandparents were from the community. My two grandfathers went to school together. My parents went to nursery together, but not in Sudan and Nigeria, but that's another story. But yeah, so both my parents are not related, thankfully, but I've got the two sides of the family are both Sudanese Jews. Yeah, which is quite unusual of my generation. I think by the time my parents were getting married, it was quite unusual to marry within the community. But they were introduced by their parents, so.
First of all, thank you. This is so fascinating. You did 85 interviews or so, and I'm just wondering, when you, aside from your curiosity about where your family came from in the community, was there any question you were trying to answer with those interviews, or was there any big surprise that something you learned?
That's a really good question. I think initially I was very keen. I didn't want this to be, when I started the project, I wanted it to be about the community, not about my family. So I was very conscious to try and branch out of my family, which was quite hard at the beginning because people were like, what are you doing? Why do you want to talk to us? Like, eventually like peer pressure kicked in, and the more interviews I did, the more it was easier to get interviews. But initially it was quite hard to get them to talk, and especially being not in my family, they were like, well, why do you want to talk to me? So it was quite hard to convince people that actually this is worthwhile preserving. And I think I was mostly just driven by the fact that there wasn't anything apart from this book in the 90s. It's okay, but it's it's not the broadest book that there is, and there are now a few articles, like academics that have done some work, but again, they're articles, they're not kind of any sort of substantial research. So yeah, it was really important for me to make it a community project and to preserve it. Initially, when I first started, I was like, oh, I'll collect some recipes. It'll be like 6 months. I'll do some recipes, maybe get some stories about the recipes. Like 10 years later, I'm still here. Like, so yeah. I think what took me by surprise was how much there was, and the more I interviewed, I was like, no, I can't stop now. I can't stop now. So yeah, I think that's what maybe took me by surprise.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
Have you thought about transposing your project to a different format, like a documentary film, or even a novelistic treatment based on what you have?
So all my interviews are audio only, they're not filmed. So I don't think documentary would work. I am kind of half working on a book-ish. But yeah, we'll see. Yeah. I'll just go, yeah.
I'm just curious, I know that you mentioned that they're not super religious, but what, like, as a community, would you say fully assimilated? Like, I'm Bukharian on my dad's side, and that community is super insular and like very kind of segregated and observant. Is there anything like that with Sudanese?
In Sudan, or since they
Like
left?
just in the diaspora? Yeah.
No, I think they're quite outward looking, in general. I would say they, a lot of people became more observant after they left Sudan. I would say that definitely happened. And yeah, became aware of more Judaism after they left. But no, I think they're very kind of outward looking and very, I think because it was quite a small and quite a short community. This is like one of the questions that I can never like answer. Why did they have such a strong identity as Sudanese Jews when they were only there for 3 generations? I don't have an answer to that, but I think it's because it was so small, that they kind of adopted this identity very quickly and kind of took on quite a lot of Sudanese like traits and like the food as well. Like they did that quite quickly, and I think that may be why, but I don't know. But yeah, when they left, they were just as like ready to move on, I think, as yeah.
When did they first come
Into Sudan.
into Sudan?
So like I said, there were Jews before, kind of, if you go back, the oldest reference I've been able to find for a Jew in Sudan was the 1500s, who was a merchant traveller. But not any sort of community. The community started in the early 1900s when the British Empire. Yeah. There was another question over here somewhere.
It wasn't a question, it
Oh,
was just a suggestion. You can also do an audio documentary without any.
You can, yeah,
So
yeah,
if we have
like a
that-
radio, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is there anything that you would know that identified the Jewish community as Sudanese if they were out of the Sudanese space? Were there particular Sudanese traditions as opposed to Jewish that were all integrated together?
So the biggest thing is that that's how they call themselves. Like if you say to them like, where are you from? They're like, I'm from Sudan, and it's a very like definite, like I am Sudanese, I'm from Sudan. The one thing is that and again, maybe this is why they had that, is because the community was so small, they couldn't afford to be too fussy about who they were marrying. So in Egypt and in Syria and in Iraq, you know, you have Iraqi Jews marrying Iraqi Jews, Syrian Jews marrying Syrian Jews, Egyptian Jews marrying Egyptian Jews, and they didn't really mix. Whereas in Sudan, you couldn't do that. So you were a Jew and that was enough. So the food culture mixes very quickly. So Sudanese Jews will eat things actually up there. So there's like molokhia, which is like a soup, almost like a leafy green soup, almost like spinach soup, and that's very Egyptian. It's in Sudan as well, but it's like known as an Egyptian thing. And then you've got kind of kebaba, which is like a very Iraqi thing, and they would cook all of it. So it's quite rare to have, like, the food that I grew up with is kind of from all over the Middle East. It's not kind of Iraqi Jewish food or Egyptian Jewish food, or it's kind of everything. And then you have recipes that are kind of Greek from their Greek neighbors, and Italian from their Italian neighbors. And then you've got Sudanese dishes that kind of come in as well. So everything kind of mixes, and that's the food that I grew up with. And that I think is quite uniquely Sudanese. I don't know of any other Middle Eastern Jewish community that has that kind of food culture. And I think that's just because the community was so small, if that answers your question. But apart from that, I wouldn't say there's anything.
In dress or in accessories? Or
No, nothing like that. No,
Something that's meat-based rather than dairy.
I think they would care. No, they didn't mix,
No.
but they ate a lot of meat. The main meals are meat. Like you wouldn't, a main meal without meat doesn't exist. It's not a main meal, it's a side dish. It hasn't got meat in it. It's like basically how I grew up. So yeah, it's very meat based, but the desserts are all dairy based, and all with ghee and butter. So yeah, there was not, apart from again the Rabbi, yeah.
Did the food kind of evolve again in London? Like, were there any other kind of changes based on, I don't know, the availability of ingredients or
Yeah. Yeah, so the stories of like when they came to London, when they came to England, and this isn't actually just the Sudanese, it's like most Middle Eastern Jews. They came to England in like the 50s and 60s, and they just couldn't get hold of the ingredients. Like no one had ever heard of an aubergine. like you had to go to a specific Greek shop in like miles away just to get some yogurt. Like it was, olive oil was only sold in pharmacies. So yeah, there was like a huge like culture shock in that respect. But yeah, they found ways. They found like their little, you know, enclaves of other immigrants and got their food from there until things kind of developed a little bit more. But yeah, there was definitely, I think, a transition period. And the other thing is, especially maybe not so much in the UK, but those that went to Israel, their food changed with what they could afford. So things like using chicken instead of lamb or beef, because that was like more readily available. So like the stock soup bases would like move to chicken stock or soup instead of like beef or lamb because it was cheaper. Using kind of more semolina instead of rice flour, or mixing them. So that's kind of how they developed in that way. And then I think as people became more health conscious, there's like ways of like making things slightly less fat, low fat, which I've not done today. You're gonna get a calorie bomb in a minute, but that's fine. Yeah.
Say your mother tongue is it Arabic or?
I grew up, I was born in England.
No, but your.
Yeah, so my dad's mother tongue is Arabic. My mum grew up, so her parents went to Israel when they were quite young. So they spoke Hebrew to each other, my mum's side. My dad's side all speak Arabic at home. So because their infinite wisdom, my parents didn't, my mum doesn't speak Arabic, although she understands everything, and my dad doesn't speak Hebrew, they decided to only speak to me in English, which is ridiculous. I was like, why didn't you just speak to me in all three? It would have made my life so much easier, but they didn't. So I only speak English, although I can speak Hebrew as well, and I understand Arabic, but I can't speak it. And actually, I can understand Sudanese Arabic. When I say I understand Arabic, I can't really understand other dialects of Arabic. I can only understand Sudanese Arabic and a bit of Egyptian from the movies. So I went to Sudan in 2020 and I was like shocked by how much I could understand. Like I didn't think I could understand Arabic to that extent. But that was, yeah, I can't speak at all.
So in synagogue, they would have had Hebrew.
Hebrew, but again, a lot of Jews grow up not understanding what they're saying in synagogue. That's not that uncommon. So, I speak Hebrew because I grew up with it at home, and then I went to learn it a bit. And when my grandma was ill, she got dementia and lost her English a bit, so I spoke Hebrew with her, and it got better. So, but yeah, that's.
Shall we
Yes,
have the rest of the questions during our chat over
Yes,
delicious
what
dessert?
I'm gonna do is stop for a small break. 'Cause I need to go to the toilet. And then wash my hands and we'll start cooking, and then we can kind of talk and do that as well. So yeah, if you wanna. Okay, so I will share the recipes afterwards. But I'll send them to Ellery and then she'll email them too. So both of these desserts, yeah, one is a cake and one is more of a pastry. They're both soaked in a simple syrup. So I'm going to start with a syrup. I'm not making enough for both, just making a bit to show you. And then I'm going to mix up the two cakes and then we'll eat them afterwards, and I'll kind of explain as I go on what I'm doing. So simple syrup is sugar, and then enough water to just, oh, it's hot already. It's a hot syrup. Right, it's enough water to just cover the syrup when the pan is flat. There are actual measurements up there, but I'm just going to do it by eye, and I'll show you all the bits by eye. Okay, you have to stir it so that it doesn't crystallize at the bottom, just until the sugar dissolves. and I'll just show you. Eventually it will turn clear. So it's kind of already gone clear. So not the most, and then it's going to bubble up in a second. So I'm just going to leave that. I've left it on a very high heat, and that will bubble up in a second. It's going to bubble already because it's so hot. In a bit, I'm going to add in orange blossom water. This is what you get in the supermarket. So if you go to an Arabic or a Greek shop, there you go, it's bubbling. Turn that down. You don't want it to turn dark. You want it to stay clear. So I'm just going to leave that on low. If you go to an Arabic or a Greek shop, you'll get orange blossom water, which is like the diluted stuff in proper big water, like it looks like water. If you go to kind of a nicer supermarket like Waitrose, they'll sell this. So I brought this so you can see it. It's probably more accessible. And this is, it said orange blossom water. It's not water, it's a concentrated oil. So if you put in half a teaspoon of this or half a tablespoon of this, you're gonna have a bad time of it. Just use a literal drop. So you can tell it's thick enough with a grandma trick. You lift up the spoon. Once it starts dropping, you count 3. So 1, 2, it's probably a bit thick. 1, 2, 3, 3. It's a bit thick. We're taking it off the heat anyway. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of water because that is very thick already. It's a very, very hot stove. Okay. 1. A bit of lemon. The lemon stops it cooking and keeps it the same thinness that you want it at. And then just let that bubble up once more with the lemon, so it just kind of cooks it out and it doesn't taste so raw. There we go. It also just takes the edge off the sweetness with the lemon. And then the orange blossom, I usually use a teaspoon. I don't have a teaspoon. Literally a drop. And that's enough. And that's the syrup. So that's it. That's completely done. You need to leave this to cool. Is this gonna stay? It's gonna stay hot. Do you need is it gonna stay hot if I put it on it, or even if it's off? That should be okay. Gonna leave that to cool, and then I'll put it in a jar. Ordinarily, I would put it into like a ceramic bowl or a Pyrex, and then put it straight in the fridge because you want it cold for the hot cake. So hot syrup goes on cold cake, or cold syrup goes on hot cake. Never the same because it won't go in, it won't absorb. They need to be opposite temperatures. And it works better if the syrup is cold and the cake is hot. Although that's not what I did yesterday with those because I forgot to make syrup because my brain is all over the place. So I'm going to leave that to the side. And I'm going to start with the basbousa. And leave her. Can I just give you that knife to cut? Yeah, it's just, yeah. So this is, it's an Ottoman in the terms of it was all over the Middle East, and everyone fights about who actually invented it, and no one really knows. And they can keep fighting. That's fine. There are different variations in every country as to what goes in it. This is a slightly more Egyptian version with coconut in it. Some have different versions with different things. So the base ingredient is semolina. This is a thin, finely ground semolina. If you go to a supermarket, you'll get medium ground, which absolutely is fine. I think it's maybe even nicer. And again, like for example, Lebanese mix coarse and fine to get a different texture. So it's kind of what you like. So semolina, desiccated coconut. Sugar and 2 tablespoons of baking powder. And then butter. This is very soft butter. You want it soft because you're gonna have to mix it. So it's like just above melting the butter. And all the quantities are up there, but you'll get the recipe. Greek yogurt, this one. I'm gonna start out with 1.5 of these, which is the amount that it says on there, which I can't even. Where are we? 120 grams. So I'm gonna start with 1.5, but I might need more. It depends on the semolina and how it decides to mix that day. So you might need more. I'm gonna start with a spoon. These are really quick recipes that look a lot more impressive once you're cooked than they actually do to make, I think. So just going to wash my hands again and get in with my hands because it's not good. So you want it kind of like a pliable, soft dough. It shouldn't be too thick and it will come together quite quickly as well. But it's definitely, although it's a cake once it's been soaked, it's quite hefty and quite solid. Actually, the slices that I've got are quite massive, so if it's too sickly and too sweet and you can't finish what you get, don't worry about it. If you do, enjoy it, good, I'd be glad. Okay, so that's come together. I'm literally gonna put it in here and then squash it down. This tray is probably a little bit big for the quantity, but okay. And then the easiest way to get it smooth is to use wet hands, because it will look like this. And then if you just use a wet hand, you'll get the smoothest finish. So nice and smooth, and it looks pretty. Such a good tip. Yeah. It's like much quicker than trying to do it with, you know, spoons, and yeah, your hands are the best tools for the job. And then it's like traditional to put an almond, a blanched almond, it's got to be blanched, on every piece. So you have to cut it before you go. And the most traditional way of cutting this is diamonds. So like normally when you eat this, it's a diamond shape. I tried to do diamonds in these weird trays and it hasn't quite worked, but you'll see, I tried. Just like that, you just like shove them in, and then you have to pre-slice this before it goes in the oven, or it's never going to slice neatly. Yeah.
Or should I bring it back to you?
You know what? Whoever takes it home can slice it however they want. It's going to be raw, so you can slice that. So that's that. You bake it in the oven, and as soon as it comes out of the oven, you pour the syrup on it. And you think, oh my God, that's way too much syrup. Is she crazy? No, I'm not. Keep going with the syrup. keep going. It will like absorb a bit, and then pour on half the syrup. It will absorb, and then pour on the second half, and it will all absorb again, and then you'll be done. So that is basbousa, and that's it, done. I'm going to wash my hands and we'll move on to the next one, and I'm going to rinse this up as well.
Oh, then yeah, you're not gonna like. And I will have
Okay. So the next the next one is knafa, or knafa, depending on where you're from and where you're how you pronounce it, but it's the same thing. So this version is, again, it's Egyptian, and the Sudanese was like this as well. It's with soft cheese at the bottom. So you normally might, it's the more famous version is with like a stringy mozzarella underneath. That's like a Levantine version. So that's like more popular in like Lebanon, Palestine, Syria. This is kind of a more North African version. I'm using ricotta, but originally it would have been done with a type of cream, which is called ishta. And that's what you make by boiling full fat milk and taking the top off. And it's kind of like clotted cream, but it's not quite clotted cream. You can't get it. It's a faff to make it. So ricotta is just as nice and works just as well. So that's your question about changing things. So yes, so, and again, it's very quick and very simple. This mega hob that's gonna melt things super fast. I'm just gonna start by melting butter. Just gonna leave that to melt very quickly. This is quite a flexible recipe in that you can kind of change it to taste in terms of your cheese to pastry ratio and what you like. Personally, I think all of the recipes that we cook are flexible recipes. The reason that they're locked in as recipes as they are is because always the woman who gave it to me, that was how husband, son, father enjoyed it. And that's how they cook it. So I kind of think, do it to your own taste. Adapt it to your own family and what you like. And I'm not putting anything in this ricotta, it's just as is, because there's going to be enough sweetness and flavor from the rest. So yeah, just literally just put it in.
That's all ricotta, is it?
That's all ricotta. It's just for the size of the pan as well. So, just yeah. Again, at home I would do this in the microwave and just melt it directly. So in Sudan, they would use ghee mostly, yeah. Not really, because you're melting it anyway, and it's yeah. They didn't have fridges until very late, so everything was bought fresh that day. So yeah, there was no. That's some olive oil going in there as well, so it makes it more crunchy than just pure butter. So okay, so that's melted butter and olive oil mix. Let me put this on here so I can. I'm gonna get messy now. Okay, this is gonna get a bit messy now. So, this is kashrut pastry made famous recently by Dubai chocolate. Everywhere, I don't know. So, it comes in. This is kind of half a packet that you would buy. Again, go to an Arabic or a Greek shop and they'll sell it in the fridge section. Sometimes it's frozen. It's kind of shredded phyllo is what it is. And it's very kind of roomy and messy.
What's it called again? What's it called?
Kashrut. That's how it's sold here. Yeah. So I'm gonna get it. Dip it in the butter because you want it to soak in. Kind of give it a squeeze so it's not you don't want it dripping, but you want it fully coated so it's not, yeah. And then you just put it on top.
Is that like some of the things that they use in baklava?
Yeah, the nests.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the same pastry.
Why would you use butter rather than olive oil?
So if you wanted it non-dairy, I would use margarine. I wouldn't do it purely in oil. And that's another thing actually, as they moved country, margarine was cheaper than butter, so and also people stopped eating milk after meat, so they would use margarine. So that
What
kind of,
about for the cotter?
well, no, not for this, but for other desserts, they would use margarine. In the advert for this, I posed the question, what would the rabbi's wife do? Because she had a massively sweet tooth. She would eat dessert first. So she was like very well known for getting to an event, eating dessert, and then having her main, because that was the only way she could get around the meat and milk issue. And just make sure it's kind of nicely.
Do you put the rest of the butter in, or the rest of the butter in?
You don't know.
No.
I probably bought a bit too much butter because I was afraid of not having enough. But at home I would measure it slightly better probably. But there's not that much left, to be honest. So that is it. That goes in the oven until it's kind of partially cooked. When it's partially cooked, you put pistachios on top, which I will give to whoever takes it home. Sprinkle pistachios on top and let it cook, let it finish cooking, because you don't want the pistachios to burn. And then when it comes out the oven, again, you just soak it in the same syrup. So that's basically how you cook the two dishes. We've got them to try, some that I made yesterday and brought with me. So yeah,
Thank you.
dish up.